Welcome back to Break the Chains. Here again, your host, Gwen Cardin.
Before we resume, I'd like to remind you that I really do appreciate receiving feedback and ideas from listeners, and I would especially like to hear from you. So please take a couple of minutes after the show to email me your ideas and comments at addictionradioshow@gmail.com. We're talking today to Dr. Skip Sviocla about his very personal story that he details in his new book, From Harvard to Hell and Back. Dr. Skip, when I was reading your book over the weekend, I could not put it down. There were so many gritty details, and just trying to imagine going from being so wealthy and living such a high life to the depths to which you sank were just, it was really hard to put down. I'd like it if you could tell listeners just a little bit more about that really horrible time in your life, because I think it serves to show the wonderful contrast that we'll talk about a little bit later to what your life is today.
Sure. I initially was insulted. I don't know how I dared to be insulted, but was insulted when they took my license away. And like a lot of the patients I treat today, my first thought was, well, the heck with this. I don't want to be a doctor anymore anyway, which was really my withdrawal talking. And I thought, well, anybody will want a guy with a couple of Harvard degrees. Somehow I managed to be arrogant even then. I thought I've lost everything, but I'm going to go and get a job because, after all, I'm smarter than anybody. Well, I found out that even though I tried to clean up a little bit before I started to drink again, and I went in and looked for many kinds of jobs, I never got a call back. For the first time in my life, no one even would give me the time of day. I tried to get sales jobs. I tried to get administrative jobs. I tried to get any job that I could, and no one wanted me. That's when my wife realized that we were going to have no income. When the IRS forced the sale of our house, I had really run through all our savings, and I had credit card bills of $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 a month, and so we really were broke. And that's when we had to move in with my kids. And when we were up in the Los Angeles area, I tried job after job. I was able. My first job was a guy in AA, because I had started to go to AA off and on, who allowed me to came up to me after a meeting and said, "Listen, I had spoken a little bit about my state," and he said, "Maybe I'm insulting you, but would you like to have a job?" Chopping cilantro and onions in the kitchen of my restaurant. I'll have to pay a minimum wage, but you'll have something. And I was so grateful. I absolutely wept. I had never thought that I would want to take a job. I went to work for this guy for a little while. I did work hard, but frankly, the young guys next to me were a heck of a lot better at chopping than I was, and eventually he had to let me go. Then a little bit later, I had the audacity to apply for a job as a manager in a sandwich shop, Quiznos sandwich shop, and I was trying to control my drinking at that point, and I was able to do okay for a couple of weeks, but then I started to drink before I went to work in the morning, and one day I went in, it was all overwhelming, and I just left the place, locked it up. And when the owner tried to find me, he did get in touch with me a couple of days later, actually said, "Look, straighten yourself out, I'll give you a second shot," and I failed a second time at the Quiznos. I was distraught and devastated. My wife, working as a teacher's aide, struggling. We could barely afford any food, and we certainly had no luxuries. And any money that I could find that I would steal from her or from the liquor store got me to be stealing bottles. I can't tell you how many cold, freezing nights I slept on the beach or in a public toilet on the beaches of Southern California. So life was really horrible at that time. And, tramping around, my family would come look for me. I must have put them to the tortures of hell. If I would see them, I would run away, and they would try to find me, but I had a lot of good hiding places. That is so different from when I got true recovery that it blows my mind. When I came back to Rhode Island, there wasn't there were not a large number of people looking to hire me, but when I went to a couple of recovery places and said, look, I need to get my license back before I can become board certified in addiction medicine. So would you teach me recovery from the counseling side? I'm an old ER doc, used to seeing things, fixing them, and sending people out. Recovery is certainly a long-term business, and all of a sudden doors opened to me. I found that the joy of my first job paid me $24,000 a year, and again, I was ecstatic. And this time, because I was sober, I was able to keep it. So,
what were you doing in that job?
I was an intake coordinator for a place called Meadows Edge. It's a recovery center, not unlike my own now, that's down the road from me in Rhode Island. The owner of that was a physician who hired me. He said, now listen, if I hire you and teach you all about addiction, will you go out and become my competition? And I looked at him and I said, well, honestly, that would be great. I would hope to be able to do that well. And he hired me anyway. And so I was in Rhode Island for about a year and a half before I actually got my license back, and then I had to get my DEA back. All that time I was learning from all the counselors about how to treat addiction, because doctors are relatively new to addiction treatment, and there's a pretty big clash among some doctors who always want to be at the top of the pyramid rather than part of the working team. And doctors need to understand where they are in addiction. If you're board certified in addiction medicine, doesn't mean you know anything about counseling. It just means you know about the medicine of addiction. And so I saw from the inside that no longer could I be the big boss the way I was of all the emergency rooms I worked at, but that I had to be part of a team, because most of the people working in recovery either were in recovery themselves or had been trained in a more counseling bent. And now this new addition of doctors who generally think they know it all, although I'd been humbled sufficiently to not think I knew it all, was able to assume a better place. And so as I did learn about addiction and work with a bunch of counselors and work with a psychologist who used to do some assessment of people for their psychiatric needs in this clinic, I suddenly saw that I was really just a cog in the wheel, perhaps the hub of all the cogs, because ultimately a doctor who's running the clinic is ultimately responsible. But without the input from my counselors and from the psychologist who works for us, I would be at sea, because this was not, I didn't know it as well as they did, certainly from the counseling side.
So how were you staying sober during this period? What was keeping you straight?
I had a 5-year contract with the nursing board. The medical board. I'm sorry. I had to. Now I'd already been sober for 3 or 4 years by the time I got back to Rhode Island. So I had done that just because I quite frankly never had the urge after that moment on the roof. But I was going to AA meetings. When I got back to Rhode Island, I didn't go to quite as many, but I had to go to a doctor's meeting of all doctors in recovery, led by a psychiatrist. I had to submit to random urine screens, 8 a month for the first year, 6 a month for the next 3 years, and 4 a month for the last year, and always had to show up, and they were always clean. I had to see a counselor who was a master's level guy in good recovery, and so my week was filled with a group meeting with doctors, occasional AA meetings, and urine screens to keep monitor me, and my counselor, a guy named Donald Coach, who to this day I see some 13 years into my recovery. I remember the first time the medical board of Rhode Island said, you're going to have to get a counselor, and they picked this fellow. I guess I had gotten a little less humble at that moment. I said, well, I need a psychiatrist. I don't need a social worker. And they said, this is who you're going to go see. We like him, and we hope you like him. I went to see him. I said, Donald, I'm sorry, but I really think I need a psychiatrist. He laughed and said, well, I guess you're stuck with me. And now, years after my contract is up, I see him once a week, because as a guy who's sober a lot more years than I am, I can sit down and get a whole raft of recovery information from him every week. He's really been the thing that I've stayed with the longest. My practice now allows me to see people who are coming in, still using, relapsing, and it serves as a constant reminder of how happy I am to be clean, how happy I am to put my head on a pillow at night and go to sleep, and all the wonderful aspects of recovery that people don't even know about when they're using.
Let me ask you this. What was it like trying to repair the relationship that you had destroyed with your wife and your children?
Well, my children were standoffish. They were helpful. Interestingly enough, I'm sure they were very angry with me, but they never showed it to me so much. They unfortunately took it out on my wife because she was the stronger one of the two of us. She is not a drinker or a drugger by any means. She had been the strong person in the relationship. She certainly had gotten tired of me, and now, in retrospect, she said that she was getting near the end of her rope, and had I not walked in that night, we probably didn't have too much longer to go. We've now been married 45 years. She's really the hero in my story. She saved my life. But it was interesting when I first started the first couple of days I didn't drink. I just laid low, was always where I'd say I'd be, didn't disappear into the street anymore. She'd go off to work. I would do what I could to make a little supper when she came home or be a dutiful spouse. And I used to walk up to her and just plant a kiss on her cheek or neck. At first she was repulsed by me. I don't blame her, because we had long ago stopped being intimate as I turned into the disgusting individual I was at the time, or certainly acting in a disgusting way. She would flinch when I'd come over. And my whole point in doing that was just to get close enough to put a kiss on her neck or cheek so that she could smell me. I know that sounds crude, but I had been for so long thinking I could have a little sip of vodka in the morning and then go around all day trying to cover your mouth and act as though you hadn't been drinking, that I just wanted her to know that I wasn't hiding anything anymore. You can, if you smell any alcohol on me, then I leave me. But right now, all I would do is go up and do that. And slowly, I began to do the things that people in recovery do. I told the truth. I met my commitments, and these are things that for years I hadn't done. But I could always lord the money and the good times over it, and now the simple things were magical. And as my counselor tells me today, after 45 years, neither one of us is getting out of this alive. So occasionally I will go home. I must say that she doesn't doubt that I'm sober anymore, but I've got a few years yet to repay her, and she reminds me every now and then. So, but we're doing wonderfully well. We've had 8 grandchildren we love. We travel to see them, and she's been wonderful.
Oh, well, that's great. Well, listen, it's that time again when we have to take a quick break from the show, but stay tuned and we'll be right back.
You're listening to Break the Chains, America's top radio source of information for people struggling with drug or alcohol addiction. Here's your host, Gwen Cardin.
Before we resume talking to Dr. Skip, I want to invite you to go to our Facebook page and like us. You can find it at www.facebook.com/breakthechains1. Dr. Skip, we are in the last part of our hour. I'd like to know, is there anything you'd like to finish telling us about your own story? And then I would appreciate very much if you could share some of the knowledge that you've learned both through your own personal experience and your profession that might help other people who are going through addiction challenges.
Yes, I can. I think that the beginning of my joy started in California when my first grandchild was born. Each of my 4 children, who are all doing well now, certainly saw me impaired and saw me disgusted. And they will each, report now how, it wasn't quite as bad as I tried to make it out, and they're being kind. But the bottom line is they all suffered somewhat from quite a bit from my addiction. When my first grandson was born, which is after I got sober, I remember by then people were happy I weren't drinking anymore, but when I would come to see Liam, my firstborn grandson, and I love all 8 of them now as I love Liam, but Liam happened to be in the right place at the right time, I would go over and I would volunteer to take care of Liam, and since I wasn't drinking anymore, people were happy to have me do that. And besides, nobody really wanted to see me come over. They were glad I wasn't drinking anymore, but I wasn't getting work. I wasn't getting my license back. And, they were glad I was alive, but I wasn't a heck of a lot of fun. I couldn't even take them out for a hamburger or have so Liam didn't realize that, and Liam had never seen me impaired, and Liam was only about 10, 11 months old when I started to become the regular babysitter for him. So the only thing I could do was let my family go out and have fun without me. And little Liam, God love him, when Pop was coming over, would sometimes stand in the window of their home in Redondo Beach, California. And when I would pull up, he would actually do pirouettes. He would go round and round and say, "Yay, Pop is here." At that moment, nobody else wanted to see me but Liam. And now that he's 11 years old, he and I have an ongoing relationship about, and I invite him to come see me and talk about this. And he's a little young, perhaps, but we've been talking about addiction and drinking for quite a while. It's funny because as he got older and as he noticed that I never drank, he started giving his parents hell for drinking, and they're social drinkers. And I had to pull him aside and say, wait a minute. It's okay for them to drink. That's not the reason I don't drink. And I'll never forget the look on my daughter's face, like, my son is now telling me not to drink because you don't drink. I said,
well, you've had an amazing life. Is there anything in these last 5 minutes that we have on the show that you would like to share with other people that you have learned from both your own experience and perhaps from your professional career?
Yes, I think that one of the key things that I learned by experience is that surrender in this war against drugs and alcohol, well known to people in 12-step programs, but surrender, which can scare so many people away, is really the key to victory in this illness. It's the only surrender that isn't really a ceasefire. You actually begin to heal and get better. The attempt to try to control the use is something that we all do on our way down into the descent of our addiction. And we think we don't really have to stop. We just have to stop a little bit or try to control it. And I certainly did that for the last year of my active life. And it was that moment which made me realize I wasn't like those alcoholics. I was one of them. In retrospect, looking at it, that was really a surrender to the power of the alcohol. I thought, I just have to stop doing it. I can't stop. I've got to stop trying. And then everything became clear. If I had one question to ask a strange or a new patient to try to determine whether or not they understood recovery, I would simply say, discuss surrender. There are so many people who can talk the talk about surrender because they've been in and out of rehab and in and out of treatment. They will give you the right words, but there's something magical, at least in my experience of talking to people who have surrendered, where they light up, and you really can't shut them up about surrender because, like me, they have, in one form or another, by their own way, actually seen the light and decided, you know what, I can live life without the drug. I can live life without the alcohol. And it's just wonderful. And so I really think that surrender is the only surrender which wins the war. Now, granted, it doesn't stop you from relapsing, but it certainly gets you over the hump and gets you starting to get better and fill your life with all the good things that have been gone for so long because you've driven them all away. So I really think that not trying to control the illness, accepting the fact that the drugs and alcohol are going to win and that you're not. I hope that we can sometimes talk some people into surrendering a little bit earlier. And if they will just try a little surrender, I think it'll grab them and help them the way it helped me. I don't think you can be too stupid to get sober, but I sure as hell think you can be too smart. And frankly, the next little handbook I'm writing is going to be entitled Too Simple for Smart People, because I do know, and since I deal with a lot of professionals now who are still fighting addiction, I want to shake them, and I do actually say to them, look, will you just let go of all this stuff? The wonderful paradox of this illness is that if you give up, you will win, and I think that's the main message I want. Plus the joy of the growth that you do when you feel your life, whether it's with religion for some people or family for others, or a combination of all the good things you threw away, brings you a joy which I don't think that people understand is lying out there. When we're using and trying to stop, and I have certainly checked with many of my colleagues on this who are in recovery, somehow we begin to think that being normal is just boring. I'm sure that's due to our impaired thinking while we're using. We think, why do I want to go through all this pain and anguish to look like that normal couple walking over there, family, children, smiling, car, home? That's so boring. And many people, we think our dopamine, which is the main culprit, I think, in this illness medically, certainly one of the big ones, our dopamine is special. We don't want to be normal. Normal is boring. Why the hell should I stop this? As bad as this is, I don't want to be boring. Well, I don't want to be normal. Well, I'm here to say that normal is wonderful, and I never even knew what normal was until I get into recovery, because my idea of what normal was living high and living fast, and because everything came easy to me, and because I made a lot of bad decisions. It's a medical illness for sure. There are aspects of the brain chemistry that make people really, it's a medical illness, but damn it, it's a medical illness that we make a lot of bad decisions on before we climb down that ladder into hell. So I'm for taking responsibility, but when you finally do, and when you finally surrender in this war, life is so good you can't stand it.
Well, and I think people, when they are intelligent, sometimes are less likely to surrender because they think, as you did, that those are those other people. I know better. I can figure this out on my own. So being intelligent can be a plus or definitely a minus when it comes to sobriety.
Yes, and I'm afraid my arrogance got in the way for so long. I was so blinded by it that I hope people can take a little lesson from the cocky jerk doctor who lost it all, even though it looked like he was doing fine.
Well, you certainly are honest, and I'll tell you, anyone who reads your book is going to be very, very that's a very heartwarming story that you tell, and because of your honesty, I think many of us don't look at ourselves in quite that way, and yet that seems to be the real key to truly becoming happy and becoming your authentic self.
Well, Gwen, thank you. You've been very kind to have me on. I really appreciate it. It's always an honor to be able to talk about this awful illness. I thank you very much.
Well, I appreciate very much, too. As I say, you're very candid. Your story is very compelling. And I love a happy ending, so that's always better as well. Dr. Skip, would you let our listeners know how they can learn more about you and your book?
Well, they can go on my website, which is medicalassistedrecovery.com, and they can, of course, get it on Amazon. They can get it on iTunes. Any number of electronic outlets will have it. Barnes & Noble carries it. But going to my website, medicalassistedrecovery.com, which is the name of my clinic, we have blogs, videos, and a whole bunch of stuff. And I would encourage people to contact me on the website. I'd be more than happy to talk to anybody at any time about their addiction.
Great. And the book is called From Harvard to Hell and Back.
And with a great co-author, by the way. I should throw in Kerry Zuckas. He's written 45 books, and he helped make that story readable.
Yes, he did. Well, the very first page just grabbed me. So, and then the rest of the book did not disappoint. I also want to add that people can find a little bit more information about you on my Talk Zone show page, and also they can contact me through the Talk Zone show page. Be sure to tune in to Break the Chains next week at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, when our guest will be author and psychotherapist Dr. Alan Berger, and he'll be talking about his latest book, The Hidden Rewards of Making Amends. You won't want to miss it. For now, this is your host, Gwen Carden. Be safe, live smart, and most of all, take good care of yourself.